Today, I'll be showing you how to do the basic knit stitch. This stitch is for beginners because it's easy and very simple. You can make anything with this stitch, scarves, pot holders, etc. So, let's get started. The materials you'll be needing for this project will be yarn. I'm using semi-chunky yarn. It really depends on how thick you want the object you're making to be. The thicker the yarn, the more thick and heavy the object will be. A pair of scissors to cut the yarn. Knitting needles. I'm using 6.5mm. I actually prefer smaller needles, around maybe under 6.5 or maybe around 6. I like these because they make the stitches smaller so you can add more of them so it's thicker. A plastic needle. This is just so at the end you can weave in the yarn. And an optional ruler. I use a ruler just to measure how far I've gone with the object. So, let's get started. To start, first you will need to cast on. How you do this is you take around maybe 6 inches of yarn and tie a slip knot at the end. How you tie a slip knot, just do a little bow and then wrap the yarn around and push it through. And then pull tight. Like that. Take your needle and put your needle through the knot and then pull. Make sure you pull so it's tight but not too tight. You want to make sure it can still move on the needle, but you don't want it to be falling off the needle either. So you want to make sure it can stay on. Next, you're going to make an L with your fingers. Take the yarn like in both of your fingers, make a loop and put your needle through and pull. Again, make an L, make a loop, put it through. You can also, you don't even have to make an L, you can just make a loop, but I find it easier to make the L, so make the L, wrap around, pull through. Make an L, wrap around, pull through. How many of these loops you make depends on the object you're making. If you're making a scarf, you want to have around maybe 25. If you're making a pot holder, maybe around 15. A coaster, maybe around 10. Today we're going to be making a coaster, so I'd say maybe around 10, approximately 10. Okay. You're going to take the needle with all the yarn in your left hand and your empty needle in your right hand. Like this. Take your empty needle, push it through this loop so they're sharing the loop. Take the long tail of yarn, wrap it around in between the two needles. Take the right needle, go under the yarn, and then pull the needle off, pull the yarn off this needle onto the other. Again, you go under, so they're sharing the loop, around, back under, and off. Under, around, back under, and off. Under, around, under, off. Under, around, under, off. And just keep repeating it until you get to the end. Now you take the needles and switch hands and you repeat. You go under, around, under, over, under, around, under, over. You just keep doing the same stitch, and each time you get to the end of the needle, you just switch needles and continue. It may be a little tricky at first, but eventually you'll get the hang of it and be able to go fast. Make sure all the stitches are equally spaced out. You don't have to have them spaced out, it's just easier that way. Ta-da! You're gonna want to keep going until you have a length that you want. If you have like a scarf, you're gonna want it to be thinner and longer. If you have a pot holder, you're gonna want it to be square. So this is why I use the ruler. You just measure how long you have, and so now you know to go that length. So just keep at it until you get to that length. Now let's pretend that you don't really like the shape. You don't want it to be necessarily a square. You want it to go out a little bit at parts. It's a simple fix. All you do is just make another loop. You make an L with your fingers and make a loop. And now you just knit that loop in, and you can see with this one how it's all even, but there's a stitch that goes out a little bit. How to fix that? If you make this stitch and then realize that you want it to go back to the normal shape, all you do is you just take the two loops together and knit them like normal. Like that. As you can see right here where we added the extra loop, you can't even notice that it's there. If you do want the extra loop, you just make an extra loop and knit that right in. You may be wondering, what happens when I get to the end of my string and I need to add more? It's a simple fix, really. All you do is you just tie the new string on. I just use a simple granny or square knot, and it may pop out a little bit, but you can always weave it back in later and it's hardly noticeable. Just a simple knot. Now you knit that in. Knot is not very noticeable at all, and you can just cut these off later and you won't be able to notice it at all. the stitches really depends on how loose you want your object you're knitting to be. The tighter you pull them, the harder it's going to be to get the needle under the yarn, but the tighter the stitches are going to be together and the more closed it's going to be. The looser you do it, the easier the stitches are going to be to make, but the object might have several holes in it or gaps in it because of the loose stitches. But it all depends on what you're making. If you're wanting to make a coaster or a scarf, I suggest tighter stitches like this, not too loose but not too tight. If you're making a looser thing, I suggest like a fancy scarf. You want to have looser stitches.